Hey, what's up, everybody? Jay here. Today we're going to be talking about some more rebuild stuff. I got 5 different kind of topics I'm going to talk to you guys about. But before we get into that, we had one of our dynasty owners send in a trade that he thought was geared more kind of towards rebuilding for one of the two teams, at least. That trade was sent in by Taylor Bastido. I'll go ahead and pull this trade up here. I'm going to put it down here at the bottom. Bastido received Saquon Barkley, obviously, and Jarvis Landry. Owner number 2 receives Michael Gallup, Ronald Jones, Courtland Sutton, and a second-round pick. My initial thoughts here on this trade were Bastido is going in for a championship next season, and owner number 2 is rebuilding. And the reason I say that is Landry is an aging receiver. He does have a promising outlook over the next 2 years. There's a lot of talk with OBJ not being in Cleveland, and that really boosts Landry up as we've seen the second half of this year. Once OBJ went down, Landry really took off. As well as Saquon Barkley. He's got another 2 years under contract. He's like $7 million. He can be the RB1 any season that he stays healthy. We've all seen it. We all know he can do it. He's capable of it. It's just a matter of him staying healthy. He took somewhat of a risk on Barkley with an ACL injury, but players tend to come back from that nowadays. So I do like the trade on this end, especially if you're going in for a championship next season. As far as owner number 2, like I said, Michael Gallup, Ronald Jones, Courtland Sutton, and a second-round pick. Clearly he's rebuilding. The Landry dump was great on his end. You know, he just opened $15 million worth of salary by getting rid of Jarvis Landry. On top of that, you add in Courtland Sutton, who's a stud. He's got another year left, I believe. He's relatively cheap right now. He is going to get a nice contract, especially if he can bounce back next season. If he can't, obviously that's a bit of a disappointment. Gallup had a down year this year, but he is young and talented. We all know what this kid's capable of. He had an 1,100-yard season 2 years ago. Well, last season. Especially once Dak gets back, it did kind of seem like he was getting phased out of the offense somewhat, but he does only have a year left in Dallas. He could be a potential trade candidate this season. We'll just see how that plays out. Ronald Jones, I personally think Ronald Jones is a talented running back. I think he should definitely be a starter in the NFL, but I don't think his coach likes him for some reason. It just seems like every excuse they get not to play Rojo, they're throwing it out there, and it just doesn't seem fair for the kid because he runs hard, he runs people over, and he runs with a purpose when he runs. So I definitely like the little trio he got. This year's draft is very, very deep. From what I've seen in initial mock drafts, the second round could be a first round in most years' drafts. It's that deep, like the back half of the first round is you're getting those guys in the second round, even towards the end of it. So the second round pick's very valuable. I like that. As far as the outlook on this trade, I like both owners. Especially if I'm right on the rebuild and Bastido running for a championship. I like the trade. I feel like both owners won. It did put Bastido a bit up against the cap, but I'm sure he's got other players he can weed out and free up a little bit of cap space for free agents this coming year. All right, let's get on to the rebuild stuff. The first thing I want to talk about is, when is it time for a rebuild? And there's multiple different things that could lead to a rebuild or an owner wanting to rebuild. The first one I'm naming out basically 3 obvious ones here in Dynasty Owner. And the first one I got is you just had a bad draft. You drafted players, they don't look good, their future doesn't look bright, and you're just not excited about the team. So you just want to go ahead and start over. And that's not a bad strategy sometimes, honestly. It's better than riding it out for too long and having your team in the basement for way too long. You don't want to be in the basement 6-7 years or something like that. That's no fun. The second one is just injuries. They happen to everybody. Unfortunately, here in Dynasty Owner, injuries are a bigger part of your team, and they can derail your team a lot faster than a normal dynasty. In normal dynasty, you have the option to just kind of to chuck it up to I'll run at it again next year. They're not that old. But here in Dynasty Owner, it's a little different of a concept because if you're going in for a rebuild and you have salary, I lost my train of thought. I apologize about that. If you're going into a rebuild or a season and you have injuries, what happens when you got 2 or 3 guys next season on new deals and they turn out to be expensive new deals? Now you can't keep some of these guys. So this season was basically a wash because one of your stars was injured for the year, and you don't have that ability to just push it towards next year because of the salary cap. It kind of forces you to be in win now mode like most NFL teams are. Most NFL teams either want to be rebuilding or winning. They don't want to be stuck in the middle for years and years. They want to be on the rise or very bad. The last thing I kind of hit on there a little bit is a lot of new contracts. If your team next season has 6 pending contracts on important players, 99% of the time that's going to be players that are getting good deals, because if they're important to your fantasy team, it means they're producing in real life. So if you got, you kind of want to plan on that and try to scatter out your stars a little bit in terms of the years left on their contract. That way you're not trying to pay everybody at once, and you can maybe cut one person instead of having to cut 3 that could be valuable to your team this year just to fit one extra guy under your cap. The next one we have is, where should you start when rebuilding? And what I mean by this is kind of what position do you start with? Do you start by just sending out trades for everybody? And I kind of have a little bit of a method in my madness on rebuilding. I personally I personally just want to get rid of my valuable running backs right away. I don't want to sit on them and have them get hurt or get old fast like we always see running backs do. If they're valuable, I'm trading them right then and there if I have my mindset on a rebuild. Sometimes I will trade them and acquire a rookie running back. I try not to. I had to on this team because that was the only offers there. I ended up getting Dobbins and Gibson, but I try to stay away from running backs until the very end. The second thing I try to do here is, after I've got shipped out my running backs, I like the core of my team moving forward. There might be an old receiver or a tight end or something you got to trade as well. Try not to trade your quarterbacks unless they're just eating up too much of your cap and you're not going to win for a couple of years. Then maybe get rid of them and try to draft a younger one. And once he's ready to go, your team might be ready to go. But as far as that, you want to draft tight ends first. Load up on tight ends, after you've got your core, because these guys usually take 3 years to develop. And what I mean by 3 years to develop is it takes them at least 3 years to put up consistent fantasy numbers. Not even consistent most times, but just enough for you to compete with. Look at Troutman this year. He's a decent tight end prospect, and he virtually didn't do anything. Even Cole Kmet, I believe he was the first tight end drafted last year, and he got a little bit of usage towards the end of the season, but it wasn't nothing you could count on in fantasy. After the tight ends, what I usually try to do is I'll look for at least one, but I try to target and get 2 stud wide receivers that you can count on most weeks. Obviously everybody has a bad week, but just consistent, high floor wide receivers. Somebody like what Brandon Cooks was doing at the end of the year would be a perfect number 2 if you can somehow manage it, but it would be a solid number 1 on your start to rebuild. That way you can, draft young receivers, and as they build up, you got Brandon Cooks there to fill that void if you think you can make the playoffs. If not, you don't want a player like Brandon Cooks, but that's a talk for another day. After you get your tight ends drafted, you find some receivers, you're feeling good about that. You want to look for a top 10 quarterback. And there's multiple ways you can do this. I'll touch on them a little bit later in the article, I believe. Let me make sure here before I get going too much. No, I'll touch on them real quick now. But you want to find a top 10 quarterback, and you can get those a couple different ways. I personally don't feel like trading for one is a good idea because you're going to mortgage your future bad by trading for one of these star quarterbacks. Imagine what it would cost for you to go out and get Justin Herbert right now. You're going to have to spend every first, second, third round pick you got plus some, probably. Or, Joe Burrow, even though he's hurt, it's still going to cost a premium to get him. So you want to find a way to get a top 10 quarterback, and the best bet is to draft one usually. Or in this format here on Dynasty Owner, there's always quarterbacks in free agency. In my league, Ryan Tannehill and Aaron Rodgers were there. Either will get you by enough as long as you have a solid cast around, Tannehill, not as much as Aaron Rodgers, not as much as Tannehill. But as long as you got a good supporting cast around Tannehill, that could definitely be a championship team. So, find one of those quarterbacks, and then after you feel, you feel like you're just 2 running backs away now. You got your tight end that's producing somewhat, at least. You got good wide receivers now. You found your quarterback of the future, or the quarterback right now, at least. Now you go out and get your running backs. You can either get these by drafting or trading. If you're going to draft them, you want to try to hit on some third-round picks like 2 years ago or something like that. As you go, you want to draft a couple running backs late rounds, like I like to call them lottery tickets, but you draft your running backs or trade for them. At this point, you're ready to win now. You don't necessarily need the draft capital. Salary is good. So go ahead and trade some draft picks and draft capital, or even really young talent that you have that you don't feel you're going to need to compete for a championship right now, and try to use that to acquire some running backs. The next topic I wanted to touch on is, should you rebuild or should you retool? A lot of fantasy owners that I know personally get this a little mixed up. They almost think it's the same exact thing. And a retool is totally different than a rebuild. A retool, you're not trying to get last place 3 years in a row so you can, you don't have your 3-year plan. A retool is, this offseason, I'm going to fix my team and I'm going to compete next year. And basically, there's multiple ways you can do that, but the most obvious to me seems like, a team that drafted, like I did. I drafted Darnold and Jones as my quarterbacks. I highly undervalued quarterbacks coming into Dynasty Owner. So I didn't feel like those guys were even worthy of me trying to put together a championship roster, so I blew everything up, along with CMC being hurt, getting a new contract and stuff like that. I already talked about all that. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but that's why I did that. That's why I did a rebuild instead of a retool. Now, if CMC had 2 more years, same with Mixon, I probably would have just went out and picked up an Aaron Rodgers and ran at it. But I wouldn't have been able to keep Rodgers along with Mixon, Hunt, Fournette, CMC, all those guys next year. So I had to rebuild. But if you're in the position where you got young players, but you're bad at quarterback, or, you had some bad luck at running back, and your running back had a career-ending injury, or your wide receiver just tanked and doesn't look like he's ever going to be good again, then you can retool by trading some draft picks, fill in that void in your roster, and retool and compete next year. The rebuild, you're virtually tearing everything down, down to the foundation, and building it back up with draft picks and very, very young players, usually rookies and second-year guys only. I think that's all I got on it. I kind of want to touch on, a lot of it will depend on team outlook, obviously, as I kind of touched on there a little bit. But another thing I want to say is, just don't get stuck in the middle. And I'm going to talk about that here in a minute, but don't get stuck in the middle. It's a horrible place to be. There's a reason real NFL teams don't want to be stuck in the middle of the NFL draft. So it's virtually the same process. Neither do you. The top shelf athletes are up at the top. You don't want to be drafting down low. The next topic we're going to touch on here is, be real with yourself about your team. And what I mean by that is, I have a little saying. I'm sure other people use it as well. It's a my team bias. You think every guy is, next year he's going to be better. He's not going to produce like he did this year. It was just a slump, and then you find yourself saying that year after year after year after year, and it just never fixes itself. So you might as well not have a my team bias. I'm guilty of it too. I'm sure we all are when we first start fantasy. You know, the guys we drafted that we just, there's no way we missed on them. It was just a bad year. And again, more with that is, you know, you don't want to be stuck in the middle. If you're not real with yourself about your team, you're probably going to be decent enough to win a couple games. So you're never going to be picking high, but at the same time, you're never going to win anything either. The owners that are honest with themselves, they tend to win faster. You know, they're not in rebuilds for 5 or 6 to 8 years or whatever it takes these, you know, the owners to wake up, but they win quicker. They realize it. You know, I made a mistake, or my guys are hurt, or my contracts are coming up. Rebuild, you know, and they rebuild right away, and it benefits them, and they get back into the winner's circle a little bit faster than most of these my team bias owners. The next thing is, why do owners rebuild? And what I mean by that, you know, obviously this is kind of an obvious question, but it's, why would anybody want to lose? And a great quote I hear a lot on the podcast Dynasty Nerds is, even when you're losing, you're winning in Dynasty football or Dynasty fantasy. And what that basically means is, even though you have a 0-10 start to your year, it doesn't mean it's got to be all bad. You know, there's still sunshines and rainbows somewhere, and them sunshines and rainbows are Trevor Lawrence or Jamar Chase or Devonta Smith or, you know, Justin Fields, whoever you want out of this class. If you have a bad season and are losing, you're going to win in the rookie draft, because you get your pick of the litter, basically. You know, like I said, that the top of the draft is where the studs are. I can't stress this enough. You do not want to be stuck in the middle. If you're stuck in the middle, you're taking shots on players all the time that might not be it. You know, this last draft and this draft are a little bit deeper, so it's not the case as most years. But most years, your top 3 or 4 guys are the studs, and the rest are kind of, they might be great, but you never know. So you either want to be picking 1 to 3 or 9 to 12. And why I say 9 to 12 is because that means you had a real good shot at a championship that year, and it's not necessarily a failure. Yeah, everybody wants to win every year, but sometimes you just don't. You know, the luck doesn't go your way, and that's all there is to it with fantasy football. We've all seen that. You know, you have your star player, Alvin Kamara, go out in the first quarter with a hamstring, and you lost that week because you just lost your best running back in the first quarter. You know, it's just how fantasy goes. Or Alvin Kamara getting 56 or 66, I can't remember which it was, but in the championship game, you know, most owners aren't coming back from that. And it's just how fantasy football plays out. And it's another part that makes Dynasty owner just as much fun. You know, you feel like a real GM. It's cool. But that's all I got for you guys today. I kind of want to touch again, you know, a little bit, tell some friends about Dynasty on it. Let's make this thing go. Let's get going. You know, like I said before, if it gets going enough, you guys that want fantasy baseball or Dynasty owner basketball or baseball, you know, that can happen. But we got to tell some friends about it and help Dynasty owner grow. And, you know, don't do it if you don't like it. If you love the game like I do, tell some friends. I'm constantly telling people that I know play fantasy football, like, man, you got to check this out. It is the most immersive fantasy football you will ever play. It is so in-depth. There's so much strategy. There's so many different ways to go about things, and it's just so unique and fun. And I'm so glad I found it, and I'm glad these guys let me work with them, and it's just all been a blast, and I hope you guys are enjoying it too. All that being said, you guys, good luck on your 2021 Chase to the Ring and your upcoming rookie drafts and this offseason. We'll see you guys later. Have a good one.